Welcome to VikeFans.com's exclusive series, Jay's All-Out-Blitz, a look inside the key challenges and issues facing NFL players and the Minnesota Vikings in 2013. And now, your host, former NFL linebacker, Jay Foreman.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first podcast of Jay Foreman's All-Out-Blitz series. I'm Tom Moore, better known to most of you as Purple Pain. I'm just the window dressing for the show, so let me quickly introduce you to the man who you tuned in to hear about his views and analysis of the 2013 Minnesota Vikings, former All-Big 12 linebacker at the University of Nebraska, and a veteran of 8 years in the NFL as a starting linebacker, Jay Foreman. Jay, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. Before we get started with tonight's topics, I want to remind everybody that Jay will be podcasting every week here on VikeFans.com, and he'll try to tackle the questions that most fans want to know, but rarely get answered by the mainstream media. And you don't need to sweat his knowledge of things outside of the defensive side of the game, as he played some pretty mean offense at Edina High School in the Twin Cities back in the day, and you have to know offense in order to defend someone in the NFL. So with that as a backdrop, I say we get going and start our podcast, Jay.
All right, let's get after it.
All right. I know you watched the Vikings' first preseason game against your old team, the Texans, last Friday night. With the extensive time new backup quarterback Matt Castle got, what were your thoughts about his performance?
I think he did pretty well. I think that, obviously, by the Vikings signing him, I think he brings some sort of veteran stability because he's had some success in New England. Obviously, he's played in big games and won a lot of big games. You know, obviously, with New England, he won 11 games that year. He had a little rough time in Kansas City being the man and being a leader of a team. But I think he can come in and help Christian Ponder grow as a quarterback and obviously learn from some of the mistakes he just had recently in Kansas City. Now, on to his performance, I think he performed well. I think it was a big game for him to not only come out and show what he can do to the fans, but more importantly to his teammates and coaching staff, and obviously the scouting department too. Just because, you know, there's a lot of questions about Matt Castle. Is he a for real quarterback or is he just a pretender quarterback? I think he's now trying to resurrect his career. I think he's done a good job of really taking the reins of being a quarterback and also being that veteran presence to help Christian Ponder take that next step that the Vikings so surely need him to do this year because it's a big year for the Vikings. They had a great year last year, but, you know, the big question mark was, can Christian Ponder perform under pressure and be a quarterback? Now they went out and got some great additions, and Jennings and Patterson as receivers. You also have Rudolph as a tight end. No need to really even say anything more about Adrian Peterson. So now Christian Ponder has a lot of weapons around him, so then therefore his growth should go twofold this year.
You mentioned Christian Ponder, and the fans in Minnesota have been pretty vocal this week because, you know, even though it's the first preseason game, he only ended up playing in the first series, and that was the plan of attack Leslie Frazier had. But that first series was just 2 passes, 1 complete, and 1 an interception. From your perspective and what you've seen in preseason before, is that type of exposure and that type of playing time in a preseason game really beneficial to a player or a quarterback?
I think that, you know, they've been doing a lot of work in the offseason, a lot of work in training camp. The coaches kind of know where Christian's at. They know where his growth is at right now. And it's the first preseason game. The first preseason game, a lot of guys that are fighting for roster spots, a lot of guys that are coming in as free agents or came in as a free agent, like Matt Castle, they need the reps. So you need to get your third and fourth quarterback reps in the beginning of the preseason. But as the preseason goes on, the second and third, and especially in the third game, Christian Ponder will play a quarter and a half, I imagine, this next game, and then go in and play 3 quarters or just after halftime in the next game, and that's going to be all you're going to really see from Christian Ponder before the season starts. Christian Ponder doesn't have to solidify his position on the team in preseason. He is the starter. Leslie Frazier knows it. All the other players on the team know it. The biggest thing for Christian Ponder is to perform well in the season and be that passing quarterback that they need so everybody can't just load up the line of scrimmage to stop Adrian Peterson. He has a number 1 receiver now. He has a dynamic rookie, potential-wise coming in now, and also a tight end, and then also a great fullback, and also a great offensive line. So it's all there for Christian Ponder to do well. So the preseason, I wouldn't read too much into it or get bent out of shape too much about it just because that is normal. And, you know, let's face it, there's a lot of quarterbacks across the NFL that don't play at all in games or throughout the whole preseason. So whether it's injury or just because they want to see other guys. So, I wouldn't really want to worry about whether Christian Ponder plays a lot or really performs well. You really want him to perform well in the regular season.
You started to mention some of the weapons that he's got, and the fan base in Minnesota is pretty excited about 3 first-round draft choices that we have in the squad this year. And while he's considered a raw talent, what did you see from new receiver Cordarrelle Patterson?
I saw a man-child out there. I saw a guy out there that was physically opposing against a veteran defense that was a top 5 defense last year for the majority of the first part of the season. I saw a guy that when he finds his way in the NFL and really hones in on the little things that obviously lead to big things, I think he's going to be one of the top 5 receivers in the league. He has the same body type as a Dwayne Bowe. He's big enough to where he can body out cornerbacks, but he's fast enough that he can run past people. I think his hands have been a lot better than the Vikings maybe thought they were coming into, obviously, his rookie year. But then also I think that his willingness to work and then his route running has been a big surprise too. So I think for him, it's going to be a gradual process. I think it's going to be every game and every rep. I think he's going to get better. He's going to grow by leaps and bounds every game. And that's what is so exciting about when you have a raw rookie like this that wants to work and wants to put in time to be great. I think it was a great pick. I think he's going to be a steal of the draft. And, 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about, man, the Vikings picked so well by picking him later in the draft.
A lot of people worried about the fact that he'd only played 1 year of major Division I college football, and they worried, was the game going to be too big for him? But he sure didn't look too nervous on Friday night.
No, he handled it quite easily. I know the first game, everybody's excited, and you're going to go out there and play it like it's a bowl game in college. So it'd be interesting to see how he does in the second preseason game. But I don't imagine him having any problems. I think that gave him a lot of confidence. And I imagine going into the next game and then obviously in the third and fourth game in the preseason, I can see him performing well throughout the whole season.
One of the other first-rounders, defensive tackle Sharif Floyd, got 15 snaps before his night was cut short by what turned out to be a minor knee injury. He seemed to be pretty active. Any thoughts about his game in such limited action?
Well, I think he's a great addition to the team. I think the Vikings have been known for, the last 6 or 7 years of having a big, pretty stout defensive line. I think he's a young guy, stout at the point of attack. Obviously, he has some quickness, and obviously you've seen that he can be disruptive. I think he's a guy that, they were talking about him going potentially number 1 in the draft. So for him to slip to where the Vikings picked him for no apparent reason, because he's a good kid off the field, hard worker, well, that's another steal for the Vikings. So I think that he's going to be one of the guys that's going to make an impact quite early in his rookie year, but I think he's going to make big impact towards the end of the season. That's where you want to see rookies really step up because, the beginning of the season can be kind of hard for them, but I think as they catch their second wind, I think they'll do well.
Most teams play a really bland, vanilla base defense and offense in the preseason, so other teams can't learn too much before the regular season starts. Does a style like that make it hard for coaches to evaluate their talent when they're really just playing against, bases, no schemes that they might see in the regular season?
No, not really, because coaches, the first and foremost, they want to see, can you execute a game plan? Second of all, by playing base defense, where the majority of the guys know the defenses, you can see their athletic ability. That's the way you can see them really play fast and go out there and be aggressive. When you have a big game plan, you're going to see a lot of guys being hesitant and then not perform well. So essentially, I think it works the other way around. It gives them the best opportunity to obviously showcase their talent athletically, but then also showcase their playmaking ability also when they're out there playing within the defensive offensive scheme. So I think it works out really well. People don't want to show a lot of stuff going into the season because it's a shorter off season, which doesn't let you put in a big game plan. But then also you don't want to have teams that have a leg up on you when the first of the regular season starts.
One of the huge question marks on defense going into the season is Aaron Henderson moving from the strong side linebacker spot to the middle linebacker spot. He's a bit undersized, and it's hard to say at 242 pounds that you're undersized, but what can he expect in his transition, and do you think he has the skill set to be successful in the middle?
I think he does. I think that, what really helps him is that his brother was obviously really good, obviously middle linebacker. I think he has the height. I think he has a good weight on him. I think that, weight now doesn't really mean anything. His build, he's a taller guy, but he has good leverage, so he doesn't have to have that girth behind him. He doesn't have to be 6'3", 250 like Brian Urlacher, but Brian Urlacher could run like a receiver. He's a freak of nature. I think he'll be fine. The one thing that's going to really be different for him is just the amount of blocking schemes and how quick the blocking schemes will be. Because when you play an outside linebacker, which he was playing last year, there's only 2 or 3 blocking schemes you can get in any defense because there's just not enough people out there that can block you. So essentially, if you're looking at the offensive line, primarily just the tackle and the tight end usually blocks you. Sometimes you'll get the guard and, of course, the fullback. When you play middle linebacker, every single offensive lineman can block you, so that's 5, and then you have a tight end and then plus a fullback. So now you're at 7 people that can block you when you just had 3, possibly 4 the last time. It's going to be a lot quicker. There's going to be traps. There's going to be pull schemes. You're going to have to be able to take on people. Then also you got to, when you're in the middle of the field, and what the way the NFL is going towards now with 2 tight ends and obviously with these little slot receivers doing magnificent things in the slot and really putting a lot of pressure in the middle of the defenses, the biggest thing for them is going to be the coverages. Again, when you're in the middle, you have way more action going on. You're going to have to cover some tight ends. You're going to have to cover some slot guys. And then, of course, you're going to have to cover a running back that's going to be checking down without a lot of help as far as tackling. So it's going to be hard for him, but I think he has the right mindset to be successful. I think it's something that he's taken on as a challenge as you listen to where, him being interviewed when they're talking about bringing other linebackers in and signing Brian Urlacher at one point in time or another linebacker here and there. I think he's ready for the challenge. He's a good kid. He's a hard worker, and he wants to be successful, and he's a good athlete. So I don't really see him struggling too much on the passing schemes and the blocking schemes, and obviously just show his leadership skills, too, will lead him to success, too.
Well, I know he was one of the guys they held out a little bit from the game last week, so obviously I know when you sit down with your notepad this week, you're going to be probably paying pretty close attention to not only him, but also the other linebacker that they brought in from the Packers in free agency, Desmond Bishop. And he was hurt last year, and he's been struggling with some nagging injuries in camp so far this year, and really hasn't played in the middle at all. He stayed to the outside. I'm curious about really 2 things about him. Your thoughts on his skill sets and abilities as a linebacker or even in the middle, but even maybe as importantly, what do you read between the lines when Leslie Frazier talks about he needs to get back on the field, he needs to work through the injuries when he talks to the media?
Yeah, that's going to be huge. First, his skill set I think is well documented. He's a great athlete. He's a big time playmaker. He makes big plays. Some guys just have the knack for being in the right place, the right time, and making huge plays. I look at it as not luck. I look at it as somebody that's a good football player that's always around the ball. Some guys are just born with it, and he's one of the guys that's born with it. Now, as far as what Leslie Frazier is saying in the media, what he's trying to do is inspire him to give him a swift kick in the you-know-what to get out there on the field, because the old saying is you can't make the club in the tub. Now, granted, he had a horrific injury last year with the hamstring being pulled off the bone. The Vikings signed him on, the notion that he is healthy and going to be healthy in camp. That hasn't came to fruition. Mm-hmm. Now, that hurts Desmond Bishop 2 ways. One, he's not out there proving his worth to whoever signed him, which are the Vikings. But then another thing that happens is even if a lesser player is playing behind him, it's giving that lesser player more reps, and it's also giving the scouts, the coaches, and the players confidence in that player, because just by, I call it osmosis, the more the time that you do something, you're going to get better at. They're going to get comfortable with that backup player. They're going to get comfortable with the different players that he has to put in his position. So I think that, as long as he goes out there and plays well, everything will take care of himself. I think it's just the coaches want to see what he can do, and we're really, really excited to see what he can bring to the defense. And then obviously I think some guys behind him have been playing pretty well, but they want to see him step in and show his worth, because he hasn't really played football in a year, so they don't know where he's at physically and mentally going into the season.
Well, I know anybody who's played in the NFL 8 years, you had to have gone through your own injuries in your career. How difficult is it on the mindset, when you're Desmond Bishop and you've had an injury like that, to come back without thinking about it when you're on the practice field?
It's very, very hard. I always try to say you come back physically within, I guess a year at the most, depending on the injury. I think you don't come back mentally for at least 2. People say they don't think about it. They don't, you don't, think about it while you're playing. Yes, you do. You think about it while you're training. You think about it while you're in training camp. Can you really open up on that hamstring? And you're scared of even just getting a slight pull in that hamstring. Will that hamstring weaken your overall leg and lead to a major knee injury. Then you have to go through surgery and then go through another rehab. So it's something that weighs on your mind. It can really affect you as a player. It can affect you mentally. It can affect your whole mentality, whether you can be the same strong-minded, aggressive nature football player that you were beforehand. So it's something that weighs on your mind. But I think he has the right mindset to come back for him, because the way that Green Bay and him split wasn't on the best terms. So I think that he is very, very focused to not only prove to himself, but prove to everybody else that doubted him. And after a big contract that he signed in Green Bay, they kind of cut ties with him really quick. So I'm pretty sure that was an eye-opening experience for him.
Now, I'm going to challenge you with the last question in our podcast for tonight on the offensive side of the ball. And, Toby Gerhart backs up Adrian Peterson, and as a result, he gets very few reps in the regular season. But he's a guy who has 4.45 speed, and he rarely gets to put that on display. What's your opinion of the Viking running game if Gerhart were forced to start, assuming Peterson were injured for an extended period of time? Can he carry the load as the number one back for a full season?
Oh, maybe he could, but I don't think, he's not in comparison to Adrian Peterson. I think that he could be serviceable. I don't think that he's what he was in college. Now, look, he's a great athlete. He's had some success in production when he stepped in for Adrian Peterson, whether it's just giving him a blow or Adrian Peterson was dinged up. But you never know what he is until he has to start a whole season. Now, obviously, nobody wants to see him start because of injury. He'll maybe go somewhere else and see what he can do, but he hasn't had a lot of reps. He goes down very, very easily. He doesn't make people miss. He's a decent receiver out of the backfield, but he does have a lot of straight-ahead speed. He's more of a fullback body type with running back speed, but he doesn't have, a scat back ability to make people miss. So we'll see what he does this year. If he's really worked in the offseason to work on the weaknesses of the game, I think he can develop into something that I'll see if Vikings decide to move in another direction that a team out there that could really use. But this isn't a running back league anymore. Adrian Peterson is really the last of the Mohicans of a bell cow. So he has to go, Toby Gerhart, what I'm referring to, would have to go to, the right situation to really showcase his skills.
And I know we'll plan to talk about Adrian Peterson in depth in a future podcast, but real quickly, your thoughts on if you're a defensive guy and you're putting together the scheme and you've got to stop Adrian Peterson, what's that feel like? You've dealt with backs that have that type of talent before. How difficult is a guy like that to scheme about and stop?
It is very difficult. I think that defenders lose a lot of sleep. And you lose a lot of sleep, that's where he puts a tremendous amount of stress on the whole defense, because if everybody doesn't fit on their blocks right, that aren't intense and aren't getting off blocks and rallying to the ball, he's not just like a regular running back in the NFL that might get a 20-yard run and a strong safety to run him down. If he gets past that second line of defense, 9 times out of 10, he's going to hit his head on the goalpost, and he's going to run away from DBs and linebackers and, of course, strong safeties. So that's what's really hard about preparing for him. Another thing that's really hard about preparing for him is he's gotten better in the pass game. So he's not just a running back. He's not just a guy that you can think of that you just got to stop him in the run. He can catch out of the backfield now, makes people miss. I think he's improved drastically with his, improving his ability to make people miss in the open field. That's something that he really couldn't do as he was a younger running back. But I think now he can make people miss. And when he makes people miss, he makes the defense pay. And by making the defense pay, he turns it into big games and a lot of times into long touchdowns.
So the bottom line is you're glad you're not having to stop him on Sundays.
Well, I'm not glad, because if I was out there trying to stop him, that means I'd still be getting paid. But I don't miss preparing for guys like Adrian Peterson, just because they can make you look bad and really, really, do some bad things to your defensive ranking. But I think that he's one of those guys that's a once in a 15-year time frame. He's a Hall of Fame running back when he's done playing. Fortunately and fortunately, he's going to be the best running back in Viking history, which is going to obviously surpass my dad, who was probably the best running back in history until Adrian Peterson came along. But he's a great player, great guy, great man. It seems like he's only getting better. I don't expect him to rush for, over 2,000 this year, but I think you can, pretty much pencil him in for about 1,700 yards this year.
Well, folks, that wraps up our first edition of Jay Foreman's All-Out Blitz. And I want to remind you to submit your suggested topics and questions that you would like Jay to cover in our next few shows. And Jay will return next week to talk about the game with the Buffalo Bills and other questions facing the Vikings and the NFL. So until then, Jay, thanks for joining us, and so long, everyone.
Thanks for having me.